The morning after the storm, I stood in Roger Callahan's driveway and watched him beg the very same emergency review board he'd denied me for 4 months. My roof was still covered in blue tarp. His roof was caved in over the garage. And for the first time since I'd moved into Brookstone Estates, Roger Callahan looked scared. 3 years earlier, buying the house at 214 Windmere Court felt like winning something. My wife Claire and I had saved for 6 years. Driven past that cul-de-sac a dozen times before we ever put in an offer, and the day we got the keys our neighbor Pam brought over a plate of lemon bars and told us Brookstone Estates was the friendly kind of neighborhood. Manicured lawns, matching mailboxes. A community pool that opened Memorial Day weekend like clockwork. It looked, from the outside, like the kind of place where nothing bad ever happened. Roger Callahan had been HOA president for 11 years by the time we arrived. And everyone talked about him the way you'd talk about whether you'd learn to live with not good, not terrible, just constant. He drove a spotless white Silverado with a Brookstone Estates parking permit sticker centered perfectly on the windshield, like it mattered that people could read it from across the street. He walked the neighborhood most evenings with a small notepad, and if your grass hit 4 inches or your trash can sat at the curb past 6 p.m. on collection day, you'd find a pastel-colored violation notice taped to your door by morning. Our street backed up to a greenbelt, and on Sunday mornings I'd walk our dog, a scruffy terrier mix named Biscuit, past the same 6 houses, waving at the same neighbors watering the same rows of hydrangeas. Claire worked from home 3 days a week and had gotten close with Pam next door, trading sourdough starters and complaining, in that friendly HOA-adjacent way everyone eventually does, about the 90-page covenant booklet none of us had actually read cover to cover. We told ourselves that was fine. Most people never read the fine print on anything until the day it matters. For 2 years, we didn't give him a reason to knock. We mowed on schedule. We repainted our shutters the approved shade of colonial gray the first time the board mentioned it, no argument. Claire even joined the Spring Beautification Committee, planting marigolds along the community entrance sign every April. We weren't troublemakers. We were the kind of homeowners an HOA president should have liked. Then on a Tuesday in March, a windstorm ripped through the neighborhood at 2 in the morning and tore nearly a third of the shingles off the north side of our roof. By sunrise, you could see exposed plywood from the street. Claire took photos before I'd even had coffee, cracked shingles scattered across the lawn, a gutter hanging by one bracket, a 2-foot gash of bare wood soaking up morning dew. I filed a roof repair request with the HOA that same afternoon, attaching 6 photos and a written estimate from a licensed contractor for $4,800. Under our HOA bylaws, any exterior modification, including storm repair, needed board approval before work could begin. I expected a rubber stamp within a week. I was wrong. The silence started small, no confirmation email. I called the HOA office on a Thursday and was told the request was in queue for the next scheduled review, which, according to the community handbook, happened quarterly, the second Tuesday of March, June, September, and December. I'd missed March by 4 days. The next review wasn't until June, 3 months away with a hole in my roof. I called Roger directly. He answered on the 3rd ring, friendly at first, the way he always was when he thought you were calling about something small. Storm damage requests still have to go through the standard process, he said. We can't have people skipping the line just because it's urgent. Wouldn't be fair to everyone else who follows the rules. I told him it wasn't a line, it was a hole in my roof, and every day it sat open meant more water damage underneath. He said, almost cheerfully, nature happens to everybody, buddy, you'll survive till June. I didn't survive quietly. I tarped the roof myself that weekend, climbing up with Claire holding the ladder and a roll of heavy blue polyethylene sheeting from the hardware store, hammering it down with wood strips so it wouldn't tear loose in the next wind. It wasn't a fix. It was a band-aid on a wound that needed stitches, and every homeowner on Windmere Court could see it from the street, including Roger, who drove past twice a day. 2 weeks later, a violation notice appeared on our door. Not for the roof, for the tarp. Unapproved exterior material visible from the public right-of-way, it read, citing Section 7(3) of the covenant, with a fine of $100 per week until resolved. I stood on my porch reading it 3 times, waiting for it to make sense. It never did. I called the office again, and this time I got Denise, the HOA's compliance coordinator, who sounded almost apologetic. Mr. Callahan flagged it personally, she said. He said tarps aren't an approved roofing material under any circumstance. I asked her what I was supposed to do instead, leave the hole open. She didn't have an answer for that. Nobody at Brookstone Estates seemed to. I called Roger that same afternoon, notice in hand, and this time I didn't bother being polite. You fined me for covering a hole you refused to let me fix, I said. He didn't miss a beat. The tarp's an eyesore, and eyesores affect property values for everyone on that street, not just you. I asked him what he expected me to do instead, leave plywood and insulation exposed to the next rain. There was a pause, then a shrug I could hear in his voice. Sounds like you should have filed sooner. I reminded him I'd filed the day after the storm. He said, then maybe the system just needs to catch up, and hung up before I could answer. 2 weeks after that call, a second notice showed up, this one thicker, on HOA letterhead instead of the usual pastel slip. It referenced continued noncompliance, and near the bottom a single line that made my stomach drop. If fines went unpaid past 90 days, the HOA reserved the right to place a lien against the property. A lien. Over a tarp I'd nailed down to protect a roof they wouldn't let me repair. Claire read it twice standing in the kitchen, then looked at me and said quietly, "This isn't about grass height anymore." She was right. By April, the fines had stacked to $400, and I'd started keeping a folder. Every email, every notice, every date and time I called the office. I didn't know yet what I was building toward, but some instinct told me to keep every piece of paper Roger Callahan's HOA generated. Because a man who finds a homeowner for covering storm damage isn't a man who plays fair when it counts. The breaking point came at the April board meeting, the one meeting a year open to general homeowner comment. I signed up for the 3-minute public speaking slot, brought my folder, and stood in front of 11 neighbors and a 5-person board to ask plainly why an emergency repair had been treated like a landscaping dispute. Roger let me finish, barely, then leaned into his microphone with the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. "We appreciate your patience," he said, "but rules exist so we don't have chaos every time somebody thinks their situation is special." A few board members nodded along. Pam, 2 seats down, wouldn't meet my eyes. I sat back down with my folder in my lap, $400 in fines on a roof I still hadn't been allowed to fix, and I understood for the first time that this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a system, and Roger Callahan controlled every door out of it. That night, Claire found something I'd missed. Buried in the state's Property Owners Association Act, a printout I'd grabbed from the county law library weeks earlier and never fully read, was a single paragraph about emergency and essential repairs necessary to prevent further property damage. The statute said HOAs couldn't lawfully delay approval for repairs required to protect a home from ongoing damage, storm-related or otherwise, beyond a reasonable review period defined elsewhere in the code as 14 business days. 14 days. I'd been waiting 61. I read it 4 times, then read Roger's original email again, "You'll survive till June," and felt something shift from frustration into resolve. I didn't confront him right away. I built a case instead. I requested, in writing, every board meeting minute from the last 2 years, every violation notice issued to any homeowner for storm-related repairs, and copies of the HOA's own insurance and legal compliance documents, all of which residents were entitled to under the same statute. It took 3 weeks and one increasingly annoyed phone call from Denise before the records arrived, 2 bankers' boxes of meeting minutes, and a thin folder of violation logs that Denise clearly hoped I'd skim and forget about. I didn't skim. I spread every page across our dining room table on a Saturday night, color-coding dates with sticky tabs while Claire cross-referenced addresses against the neighborhood directory. It took 4 hours to find the pattern, and once we saw it, we couldn't unsee it. Buried in them was something I hadn't expected. 7 other homeowners had filed similar emergency repair requests over the past 4 years. Every single one had been delayed past the statutory window. 2 had paid fines rather than fight. 1 had sold their house rather than deal with Roger again. I called a real estate attorney Claire found through a coworker, a woman named Priya Anand who'd handled HOA disputes for 15 years. I laid the folder on her desk, every email, every notice, the statute, the pattern of delayed requests, and she read through it without saying much, which somehow felt worse than if she'd reacted at all. Finally, she looked up. "This isn't just a bad HOA decision," she said. "This is a documented pattern of statutory violation, and if even 2 of those other homeowners are willing to go on record, you don't just have a repair dispute, you have a case." She drafted a demand letter that afternoon, cease the fines, approve the emergency repair within the statutory 14-day window, and refund the $400 already collected, or face a formal complaint with the state's Real Estate Commission along with a civil claim for damages. I hand-delivered it to the HOA office myself on a Wednesday morning, and I made sure Roger was standing at the front desk when I did it, close enough to watch his face when Denise read the letterhead. He didn't say anything to me directly. He took the envelope, looked at Priya's name printed under Anand and Associates, and walked into his office without a word. Denise glanced between the two of us, then quietly slid a coffee mug out of the way, like she wanted no part of whatever was about to happen behind that closed door. I heard the faint sound of him on the phone before I'd even reached my truck in the parking lot. Not shouting, just fast, clipped words. The kind people use when they're trying to figure out how bad something actually is. For the first time in 2 months, I left that building feeling like the hole in my roof wasn't the only thing that had been exposed. The board called an emergency session 8 days later. Outside the regular quarterly schedule, the very thing Roger had told me was impossible for a homeowner's storm damage. I sat in the third row this time, Priya beside me in a gray blazer, the folder between us thick enough to need a rubber band. Roger opened the meeting by announcing, almost too quickly, that the board had reconsidered the timeline on several pending requests and would be approving my roof repair as a gesture of good faith. Priya didn't let it stand there. She stood, introduced herself, and calmly read the statute into the record, followed by the dates of my original request, the 14-day window, and the 61 days it had actually taken. She mentioned, without naming names yet, that 7 other households appeared to have experienced the same pattern. The room went quiet in the specific way a room goes quiet when everyone in it just did the math at the same time. Roger tried to recover. We were being thorough, he said, protecting the integrity of the neighborhood's appearance standards. Priya asked him evenly whether appearance standards outweighed a state statute designed to prevent further property damage to a family's home. He didn't have an answer. Denise, sitting to his left, looked down at the table. One of the other board members, a retired schoolteacher named Alan who'd always struck me as decent but quiet, cleared his throat and asked to see the records Priya had referenced. Roger tried to wave it off. That's not necessary tonight, Alan. We're here to discuss one homeowner's timeline, but Alan didn't back down. If 7 other families went through the same thing, I'd say it's exactly what we're here to discuss. A murmur ran through the row of homeowners behind us. Priya slid the folder across the table, and Alan started reading silently while the room waited. That single question cracked something open. By the end of the meeting, the board voted 4-1, Roger the lone dissent, to immediately approve my repair, waive and refund every fine, and open an internal review into every delayed emergency request from the last 4 years. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong because 2 weeks later the storm that hit Roger's own roof arrived, and suddenly the man who'd told me you'll survive till June needed an emergency approval of his own. Standing in his driveway at 7 in the morning staring up at a hole, nearly identical to the one he'd made me live with for 2 months. I watched him from my porch as he called the HOA office before it even opened, still in the same bathrobe he probably wore every Saturday, pacing across wet grass littered with broken shingles. I watched Denise, visibly uncomfortable, explain over speakerphone loud enough for half the cul-de-sac to hear that under the newly clarified emergency repair policy, the one Priya had forced the board to formally adopt after the review, his request would be processed within the statutory 14 days, same as anyone else's. Denise, come on, you know me, he said. That's exactly the point, Roger, she answered. Everybody knows you, that's why it has to be by the book this time. No favors, no quiet phone call that skipped the line. Roger stood in his driveway holding his phone, and for a moment he looked directly across the street at me. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. I just nodded once, the way you'd nod at someone who finally understood the rules applied to him too, and went back inside to finish my coffee. The internal review the board opened turned up exactly what Priya suspected. A pattern going back 4 years of selectively enforced timelines, harsher scrutiny for repairs than for cosmetic violations, and at least 2 documented instances where Roger had personally intervened to slow-walk requests from homeowners he'd had disputes with. At the next quarterly meeting, the board didn't remove him outright. They didn't have to. Facing a formal complaint that now had 8 homeowners willing to sign statements, Roger resigned as president 2 weeks before the vote that would have forced him out anyway. Alan, the quiet schoolteacher, was elected in his place, and one of his first actions was posting the 14-day emergency repair statute on the community bulletin board, laminated, right next to the pool hours. My roof got fixed properly that June, full tear-off and replacement, paid entirely out of pocket the way it always should have been. Minus the $400 in fines that came back to me with a formal apology letter I still keep in that same folder. Claire framed the demand letter half as a joke and hung it in the garage where I do most of my thinking. Every time I see it, I remember that the system wasn't broken. It just relied on people not knowing what it actually said and not being willing to find out. If you're sitting on a stack of ignored HOA emails right now, telling yourself it's not worth the fight, I'd gently push back on that. Read your governing documents. Read your state's HOA statute, because almost every state has one, and most homeowners never open it. The rules that get used against you can be the same rules that protect you if you're the one who actually reads them first. If this story felt familiar, or if you've got your own HOA folder sitting in a drawer somewhere, tell me about it in the comments. I read every one. And if you want more stories like this, the kind where the ordinary person turns out to be the one holding all the leverage, stick around. There's plenty more where this came from.